Your four favorites are Waiting for Guffman, The Virgin Suicides, All That Jazz, and 10 Things I Hate About You. I feel like I need to address this because anyone who knows me knows I would look at this four favorites and immediately think, wow, this is the perfect opportunity to recommend Dick, Josie and the Pussycats, and Drop Dead Gorgeous. So if anyone's wondering why I left those out, it's because they were already marked as watched. But it looks like you're a fan of all three of those movies, so I feel like I would have been on the right track. And since I brought it up, the director of Dick directed my top choice for you, which is Hamlet 2. Like Waiting for Guffman, it's about the production of a musical, and the musical director is a high school teacher. And he's a recovering alcoholic for whom theater is cathartic because he uses his troubles as artistic inspiration, which reminds me of All That Jazz because All That Jazz is semi-autobiographical and the protagonist is an alcoholic. Like 10 Things I Hate About You, it's a comedy that takes place in a high school and was loosely inspired by Shakespeare, albeit in different ways because 10 Things is a modernization of The Taming of the Shrew, and Hamlet 2 is about a drama teacher putting together a musical sequel to Hamlet. Since Waiting for Guffman is a mockumentary involving music, I really want to recommend This Is Spinal Tap, which is basically the quintessential music mockumentary. Plus, the director of Waiting for Guffman co-wrote and starred in this movie. Strike is a coming-of-age film like two of your favorites, and like The Virgin Suicides, it stars Kirsten Dunst and has a lot of female characters and feminine energy. And like 10 Things I Hate About You, it's a high school comedy with a rebellious spirit. Two of your favorites involve the production or staging of a musical, and you've got two favorites that are lighter and more comedic, and the other two are darker and more emotional. So I wanted to recommend a couple movies about theatrical productions. The Producers, which is more on the comedic side, and Synecdoche, New York, although this one is about a play, not a musical, but it explores darker themes like All That Jazz. Muriel's Wedding has a lovable awkwardness to it that I think you'll enjoy since you like Waiting for Guffman. And like that film and All That Jazz, there's a sort of musical theater element to this movie, even though it's not a musical. But I just think it has that vibe because the protagonist is obsessed with ABBA and her actions feel sort of theatrical, like she's putting on a show because she lies a lot. And like 10 Things I Hate About You, it's a comedy that's also a coming-of-age story. Pump Up the Volume is a coming-of-age film about high school students like 10 Things I Hate About You. It involves outsiders connecting over music like Waiting for Guffman. Like The Virgin Suicides, it embodies this feeling of adolescent angst. And like All That Jazz, music is crucial to the story, and both films involve performance because in All That Jazz, Joe Gideon is a theater director and choreographer, and in Pump Up the Volume, the protagonist runs a pirate radio station where he adopts a radio personality persona. So he's basically pretending to be someone he's not in order to say the things he's too afraid to say. Since two of your favorites are coming-of-age films and the other two involve music, a coming-of-age film that has a lot to do with music and also has the adolescent angst and dreamy atmosphere of The Virgin Suicides is All About Lily Shoo Shoo. But since two of your favorites are comedies, a coming-of-age musical comedy that I think you'd enjoy is Sing Street. The Royal Tenenbaums, like Waiting for Guffman, is a quirky film with an ensemble cast. Like The Virgin Suicides, it's about a group of siblings and has a voiceover narration that gives it a nostalgic, almost melancholic vibe. Like the protagonist of All That Jazz, some of the characters in this film are brilliant but also flawed and self-destructive. And like Kat at the beginning of 10 Things I Hate About You, Margot Tenenbaum is intelligent, rebellious, and emotionally guarded. Since All That Jazz is about death but also has elements of fantasy, combining those ideas with the humor of Waiting for Guffman makes me think you'd enjoy Defending Your Life. You already saw my go-to recommendation for fans of The Virgin Suicides, which is Picnic at Hanging Rock, but I always thought White Oleander also has a similar vibe, and you didn't have that one marked as watch. Palo Alto also has a sort of similar vibe, and coincidentally it was directed by Sofia Coppola's niece, and one of the characters in this movie has a poster for The Virgin Suicides on her wall. Heavenly Creatures, like The Virgin Suicides, is a coming-of-age film about teenage girls who feel isolated and are dealing with oppressive parents, and both films have this dreamy escapism vibe while also having a sense of melancholy and exploring dark themes. In the last four favorites video I did, I recommended All That Jazz to someone with the red shoes in their favorites, and since you have All That Jazz in your favorites, I think it makes sense if I do the reverse in this one and recommend the red shoes. The inspiration for All That Jazz came when Bob Fosse had a heart attack during the time when he was editing his film Lenny and choreographing the musical Chicago. So I think watching his film Lenny, as well as the film adaptation of Chicago, adds to the enjoyment of All That Jazz. Speaking of Bob Fosse, he has a part in the film Kiss Me Kate, which like All That Jazz and Waiting for Guffman is about a musical production. And in this movie, it's a musical adaptation of The Taming of the Shrew, which is the Shakespeare play that 10 Things I Hate About You is based on. And like The Virgin Suicides, it depicts romantic idealization and projection. I'll be honest, I'm not as confident that you'll like this one, but it fits so perfectly with your favorites because it's got musical theater, Bob Fosse, and The Taming of the Shrew. So even if you don't end up loving it, I think it's still worth checking out. All That Jazz is semi-autobiographical, and Tick Tick Boom is based on a semi-autobiographical musical. And like All That Jazz, the protagonist in this film is working obsessively on a musical. Since you like 10 Things I Hate About You, another coming-of-age high school comedy that includes a pair of siblings where one is substantially more popular and social than the other is The Edge of 17. I feel like I should have recommended more mockumentaries since Waiting for Guffman is the first film in your favorites, but you saw all the ones I really wanted to recommend besides This Is Spinal Tap. So even though this one doesn't fit in as well with your favorites, I think you might enjoy What We Do in the Shadows.